Well, first of all, you need to understand the clinical reasoning behind your treatment. So you can't just rely on AI documentation to interpret your treatments. You're going in, it's your skill, you're getting reimbursed for your skill, and you have to document that. You have to show payers why you should be reimbursed for that service. Starting from the foundation is like you need to know why. Like what is your why for that documentation?
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Nicole Poppert and Stephanie Meyer, founders of the Note Ninjas. Paul, Nicole, and Stephanie discuss how to write proficient, skilled, and audit-proof clinical notes, potential red flags when using AI tools on documentation, how to reduce documentation time and increase work-life balance, and lastly, the potential of note gamification to increase engagement and efficiency. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
I feel like documentation is one of those things that people just kind of, I don't know. I feel like they kind of overlook it. They're like, oh, gosh, it should be easy. And so many of you don't have to scroll far on Facebook or any other platform to see ads from companies that promise to like cut documentation time in half and all these things. And from a personal standpoint, I get it. Like every extra piece of friction there like means you can't spend time with your kids or see the next patient. I get it from that perspective. But on the other hand, it's like, what if you have these companies that are like, oh man, AI, we're going to use AI to do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, okay, well, the upside makes sense. AI could work out really well and save you like X minutes on your documentation, but the downside risk is much higher. And I feel like nobody's talking about that yet. And so I kind of wanted to like maybe just start riffing with you guys on documentation. And sorry, let me get to the compliment. I would say documentation is probably the most important part of any visit, and yet it's the thing that everybody hates or wants to harp on the most. So somewhere in there is a compliment for you that like what you're doing with documentation, I think is important. But maybe like let's kind of like jump into the deep end of the pool real quick. It seems like all these AI nerds are coming out of the woodwork and they're like, hey, let's knock out documentation. And I'm going to just say this other thing, and then I want to be quiet and get your thoughts on like where AI sits with documentation. I think it's kind of funny that all these companies that promise AI tools to make documentation better are also the same companies that if you quietly look at their terms of service online, like all the legal stuff nobody reads, they indemnify themselves even more than any other piece of software. Like just for like, anybody watching or listening to this, like, and you're not a lawyer, most companies will say, hey, if you use our software, here's the maximum limit that, we can be responsible if, you did something wrong with our software. And that's pretty normal. Like, if you, I don't know, it's like with your bank account. It's like if you had a problem with your bank account and the problem occurred because you were using their mobile app, the mobile app terms of service are pretty standard. It's like, you can't sue us for more than maybe what you deposited. That's an example. But all these AI companies, publicly, like their marketing teams are like, we're the best thing ever. We will save you half your documentation time. They will say all these things. And then you read the legal stuff behind it, the terms of service that you agree to. And it's like, by the way, we're not responsible if anything goes wrong. We're not responsible for X, Y, and Z. Oh, and by the way, your own insurance can't like come after us. Like they will totally indemnify themselves. So there's no chance. So I just think it's kind of funny because if you really stand behind your product that much, why are they like 80 pages? So now let me come back to you. AI and documentation. What's your give me the lowdown. So documentation is important, but where do you think AI fits into it?
Well, first of all, with like these AI companies that are coming out, a lot of them are just people like not therapists. So what do they know about therapy documentation? They don't have any clinical experience. What is their clinical reasoning behind this documentation? They're just coming up with things. So we use a lot of AI for our business to grow our business. And we've been kind of playing around with it to see what type of documentation it comes up with. And we have to change it all the time. It is not
It takes
accurate.
us longer to actually change it than then when we just went with our original thought. You have to really know what's right and wrong. It will give you some of the most ridiculous answers, like PT 101 stuff wrong. So you really, really have to know it. And yeah, like she said, we've been training ours because you can train them to do your own thing. You really can't just go into an AI and just use a random one. You have to train it. And we've been training it now for a year or more, and it's still sometimes what it gives us is just ridiculous. It's based, or like if you have your own stuff you put in and be like, make this sound better. It could make it maybe sound better.
But you got to know what you're doing.
You know, it's funny because like, and maybe I'm just like cynical today, but whoever the PR people are for AI, they are definitely worth whatever the money is that somebody paid them. So it's like, for example, if you were treating me and you screwed it up, we would call that probably malpractice of some sort usually. And then you have malpractice insurance for that, right? But somehow the PR and marketing people around AI, they didn't say that AI has glitches or messes up. It actually says you may experience hallucinations. like what is this? A computer on LSD? What are we talking about here? You know, and to your point, the stakes are really high. And that's the thing that like is, I think, really interesting here is that, you know, a long time, and this is just me being a nerd, I suppose, but what's really fascinating to me about some of these AI companies is that they are, to your point, I think you said it just now so well. It's like everybody's already using them. Like I noticed the other day that my wife, who I think super smart, you know, my business partner and a bunch of other businesses, super smart. The other day I noticed that she was using ChatGPT. I was like, what are you using that for? And she's like, oh, I just, you know, kind of used it to plan our Disney trip. And I was like, what? I didn't realize we were using it in our house. But at the same time, like the downside risk is what? Like I think she asked like, oh, what's the best time to ride this ride? And it goes out and like searches like, okay, the downside risk is that our wait time is twice as long as it told us. Here, the downside risk in medicine, and this also applies to like law and a bunch of other, you know, sort of no fail kind of industries, the downside is much higher. And the scary part is that a lot of these companies are sort of coming in through sort of the bottom of the org. So very few of these companies, I think, are coming in through the top of the org and getting the practice owner's blessing and getting vetted by like the insurance company that insures that practice. More often than not, I think a lot of clinicians are probably not admitting that they're using some of these tools anyway. And it's getting copy pasted in. And so, you know, I guess what I'm saying is there's something, I can't remember if it was something you guys posted online somewhere, but you said it was one of your pieces of content where there was one little phrase where you said, you know, from a documentation point, you said AI is not fully reliable. And I think that's the key. And I think if I had to make a bet on 2025, I will bet you that it'll be the year that we see the first either insurance audit or payer audit around this. And once it's discovered that like everybody kind of knows AI is being used, but what's not been tested yet is what happens if the use of that AI was wrong or somehow you know, part of a billing error, payer error, malpractice issue. It'd just be interesting to see what happens. But I would say 50-50, it's going to happen in 2025. I would bet 80% likelihood or greater it's going to happen in 2026 because somebody's got to pay for the mistake that's inevitably going to happen. I don't know if you can share this, but I'm curious. You said you guys have been training your own models and stuff like that. Is that something you can talk about, or do you want to take a pass on that for now?
Yeah, I mean,
And I've actually played around with a couple different AIs just to see like the difference. I kind of wanted to find one even for like our membership. So we have a membership. We wanted to find one that could just go through like our own information. But we have been using ChatGPT a lot, which basically everybody knows about. And you can do your own like special ones, you know, and have it save stuff. You're working, your GPTs, our voice, or all those kind of stuff. So we've been kind of training it that way. I have been trying to find something else too that really just reads like our stuff, but I'm not that techie, so if you have any.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, by the way, I think, I probably sound like a curmudgeon. I don't think AI is going away. There's no doubt about it. Like, it's here to stay. I think maybe my poorly articulated point that I think you guys would agree with is that it's just not like battle tested in medicine. I mean, ChatGPT, for example, OpenAI, in their own sort of terms of service, tell you not to use it for like medicine or whatever. Not to say you guys are doing it wrong. Everybody should. They're going to use it anyway, right? But it's just a matter of time before the models get good enough to really help. But there was something else you guys wrote online where you said something like, and I should have put the link or kept the link where I saw it, but you said many clinicians still need more foundational building on their documentation before outsourcing to AI, which I think is like maybe the nuanced, correct way to think about it is like, it's not either or, it's really more like, how do you train your clinicians? Can you talk about that? Like, what is the specific words I think you guys used was more foundational building on their documentation? What does that mean? Is that something you guys can talk about? Like, what does it mean to like get good at documentation before you bring in AI tools?
Well, first of all, you need to understand the clinical reasoning behind your treatment. So you can't just rely on AI documentation to interpret your treatments. You're going in, it's your skill, you're getting reimbursed for your skill, and you have to document that. You have to show payers why you should be reimbursed for that service. So, starting from the foundation is like, you need to know why, like what is your why for that documentation. And like you were saying in the beginning, like we overlook documentation. Like, we'll be the first to admit, no one likes documentation. I don't know one therapist who went to school to be a transcriber to to write notes all day. But we have to do it, and we're really doing our professions and our patients a disservice if we're not doing it properly. So that's why we need to build on these foundational skills of understanding our why behind our documentation, knowing skilled phrases versus unskilled phrases, and just kind of like what our treatment goals are, what we are, what our functional goals are for that treatment, and just tie it all together.
Yeah.
Georgia, like it can read like maybe like the CMS manual and stuff, but I don't think it knows how to actually put that like into practice. So it can spit out what medical necessity is, but unless you know how to tie that to your patient, it's still not going to help. So you might be able to ask, but you still have to know like what your note needs. That's like the main reason it gets audited. We have to know that kind of stuff and how to really say like your skill over a layperson, which I don't really think it knows that much either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, maybe I woke up on the wrong side of the bed today, but I should have mentioned at the beginning, but as I was getting to know you guys, like I'm not from healthcare. I came from the tech side and all that. And it's interesting to me that when we talk about documentation in medicine, like not just PT, OT, speech or whatever, but just in medicine, like everybody sort of paints documentation as like the big bad boogeyman that is like the hard thing to do. But if you like zoom out for a minute, we don't like when a policeman stops somebody, maybe this is like a hot topic, but like they have a certain amount of documentation that has to be done. And like as an industry, like you can't deny that. Like it has to be done. Lawyers, or any vendor that you use, like if the HVAC person showed up to fix your air conditioning, you wouldn't just be like, no good customer. I mean, you guys are nodding, so you agree. But for anybody listening, it's like some HVAC person that's about to charge you $500 or $5,000, you wouldn't dare pay them if they didn't document clearly what in the world went wrong and what they intend to do to fix it, and yet we're talking about medicine here and people's like quality of life and healthcare outcomes. And yet we're basically, allowing, I just think it's really ironic that this, or maybe it's hypocritical. I don't know what the right word is, but it's like, we're talking about people's lives here. And then we, as an industry, we talk about documentation being the bane of it. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Two things can't be true. You can't say that like this industry or any medical industry is about better patient outcomes. And in the next breath say, gosh, I wish we could like spend less time documenting, because somebody's got to know. There's got to be a record. But maybe that's more of a statement than a question. But I do think like the niche that you guys have sort of carved out on documentation. I mean, you and I have no business relationship, so I can say this with no strings attached. Like, I think this is like the unsexy part of the industry, but arguably the most important. and everybody seems to be taking a, slash and burn kind of approach to it. And you guys seem to be taking a more nuanced approach, which I think is the right way to go. I guess, what is it? You started to talk about like skills. You got to document like what documentation looks like, and then you got to prove the skills and all that. Is that, I don't know how to ask this question, but like, I know, the easy answer to the question I'm trying to ask is like, I guess it would probably start in school. Like it probably, the best solution here would be that we train all these PTs and OTs or whatever in school to do better documentation or whatever. But if that's not possible, where do we start from here? Like, for example, let's just set this up. Let's just say you've got a practice, you got 3 locations, you got 10 clinicians. I'm just making this up. Where does that practice owner start, you think? Like, do they like, and maybe that's, when they engage with you guys, is it like, how does that work? How do you get 10 existing clinicians to improve their documentation? Is it a bunch of online courses? Is it,
Well, that's
what does it look like?
We came up with the note ninjas, because I'll tell you right now, there was no resources when we started.
Yeah.
When we were students, I didn't know documentation. Like, we went over documentation was like a chapter, a lesson, one lesson maybe. I really don't even remember going over documentation. They told you like a SOAP note. That's kind of what they taught you about. But like, then what? And then when you go into the field, you have to learn the company's EMR system, and kind of like you're following Medicare Part B or Med A, you need to learn those things, but there's really no one to teach you. The company you would think would teach you, but do they? Not all companies do, or like they think they do, but like, are they teaching it and training you in a way that clinicians can easily understand and just implement right away? Because that's where we come in. Because we believe in, that's why we kind of started. That's how we started with our Instagram. We provided treatment ideas. And then how do you document these? How do you show your skill in this treatment? And of course, there's tons of different ways, because you're using different strategies and whatnot. And you have to personalize it for your patients. But like, we're just showing examples of how this can be skilled. So it's like a therapist will come in and see that and be like, oh, aha, that's how I change it. Or like, that's how I document it.
Because I think a lot of times we learn to like the actual facts of it. Like, you can read the manuals and all of that. And there are some people that teach, the Medicare rules. But I feel like there wasn't much tying in, like Nicole was saying, of like the treatments. When we first started posting, people would seriously tell us they didn't do a certain activity because they didn't know how to document it. And we're like, really? And like a lot of people, it was a really big problem. So that's how we started tying it. So we'll say the rules, but we really try to tie it to the treatment so people know how to actually use it, instead of just learning a lot of information and looking at their computer and being like, wait, well, how do I actually do this now?
Yep. And I know I'm jumping all over the place. I probably should have at some point. I probably should. I bet I'm probably diagnosable for ADD, but I just am too lazy to go to the doctor. But what about audits? Like, how, I love that example you just used, that like they didn't even do a certain thing because they didn't know how to document it, right? But like switching gears and flipping the coin maybe to the other side, like, what about like audits? There's something in your content about like how to make your documentation audit proof, which, sounds like a pretty bold claim, but you guys seem pretty practical. So how do you do that? Like,
Well,
what is that?
The main focus for our content until we had utilization reviewers and appeals specialists reach out to us saying how useful our information is. We actually just spoke to an appeals specialist who literally was like praising us and being like, I actually use your information to help me in the court. And a checklist and a guide to why this is reimbursable or why it's not, why it should, all those things. So our resources provide that guide for other auditors.
Yeah. And by the way, like, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, and we don't have like the training that you guys do, right? But on the flip side, we're the system of record for all of our clients, and so when they get audited, for example, they're exporting data from our systems to then give and all that. So, at the very least, I can probably just say like, the ones that have any trouble at all during that process, you can almost always bring it right back to the documentation. They either didn't prove something. They didn't prove that they had the skill. They didn't document something. It's always the documentations. It's the source of it. Like people think it's probably like fraud is like the number one thing. More often than not, it's somewhere in the documentation they sort of screw up.
A lot of people don't know why their notes are being denied too. Like they're not taught that. They have no idea. So, we've consulted with a lot of specialists and people who are qualified in doing this. And they tell us the red flags, which is, it's too vague. You're not being specific enough. You're not showing your medical necessity. We're tying all these things and showing therapists like, how to do that, how to tie that into each note that they're writing.
Yeah. Yeah. There was something else that you guys had mentioned, like one of the topics that I'd kind of like jotted down when we were thinking about this episode was, you guys have said something in the past about advocating for the profession through documentation. Can you explain what that means? I think I conceptually get it, but can you talk about that?
Right. So we were saying, as much as people hate documentation, like we were saying before, you have to have a record of everything that happens. We also feel with insurance going down, with sometimes, maybe they don't get referred to PT right away. If we have in our notes the documentation, our patients started like this, we did this treatment and got these results, like that's showing that it's working. Our PT or OT speech treatments are actually working. Like they listen to us just by us telling them? Maybe, but it's way better if we have like the objective reasons for it. So by doing good documentation, showing your objective measures, your skilled care, and then saying these patients are all getting better, maybe that will help one day with reimbursement. Maybe more people will refer to us. I just think that would definitely help by showing like the definite improvements.
Yeah. So like, what do you, I'm probably going to lose some friends on this one, but what do you say to like, it seems to me that okay, I'm probably gonna lose some friends on this, but maybe they can make me sound nicer in the post-production here. But what do you say to like all these startups that are coming out now that are like, hey, just record the patient encounter on your phone and we will turn that into the note or the documentation for you. Like, obviously you can make me the bad guy here because I asked the question, but like, what do you say to them? Because like, well, anyway, I don't want to inject my opinion yet, but what do you say to those people? Like, I know that what you said earlier, because I agree with what you said earlier, like we've got to teach, like before you outsource the products, you got to teach the clinician what good documentation looks like, right? But no, you guys are both, you're PTs, OTs, so you've been in the world now. Like, what do you say to somebody like that? Like, is it, and maybe the answer is, hey, I don't want to talk about this. We'll move on. What do you say to all these like new startups that make it sound so easy? Like, just record it. We'll do all the documentation for you. Like, what do you say to them?
Like you still need to learn it. Like we were saying in the beginning, you still have to have a foundation because what you're saying out loud might not show your skill, might not show the medical necessity of it. You still need to know like what words to say, what things to show, like what you're doing is correct. It's also, I would not want to talk the entire time, like for an 8, 9, 10-hour day, like just talking everything I'm doing. I'd rather like not. I find it a lot of work too, but
you have to make sure you're it too, and then it's like, is it wasting time? Because you're talking into something that, and then maybe someone isn't as good as talking into something as they are writing it down. Like I'm more of a visual. I like writing things down before I speak sometimes. Like, am I being accurate? Do I have to go back and edit it now because I wasn't accurate? So I think it could take more time.
Yeah.
But it's something that comes with practice.
Yeah. It's, and I generally agree with you guys. And I would just, maybe the way I would, from my view, the way I would say it is that like, I've never been an educator or anything like that, but, there's a reason why, for example, we teach kids, multiplication tables way before we let them have a calculator in the school system. I mean, and I know that's a very basic example, but I got 4 kids, and just as an example, my 5-year-old is learning his multiplication and all these other tables. And the other day he was messing around with the calculator on my phone, and it was interesting watching him kind of do this, like play with this thing. And, he was typing in numbers and then doing the multiplication. And had he not known like the basics before, he couldn't figure out, he wouldn't have known whether or not the numbers were like kind of correct or kind of not. And so I guess what I'm just trying to say is that like, it was interesting in real life as a parent to see him put a number into the calculator, try to do something and say, that doesn't seem right. And then he went back to a piece of paper and like drew out his little multiplication tables. And he like something about doing that originally before he ever got a calculator told him, because otherwise he would have just accepted what came out of the calculator. And now you fast forward 30 years. If we let that happen in the education system, what if your accountant, filed your taxes and didn't actually know the fundamentals of math and just said, oh, well, that's what came out of the calculator. Like the IRS doesn't care where it came from. The IRS just knows it's wrong and somebody's going to have to pay a big fine to fix it. So
I'm curious where it will go in like that many years and like the progression of, AI and all the technology. I would like to think maybe it's not going to go as fast and we can just slowly transition into it, but you never know. Everything's, we're a fast moving world now. So,
I think, so this is, look, this is one of those things that I could talk about for hours. I think there's no scenario where AI or any of these tools go away. I mean, it's not like Google stops being relevant, right? But on the flip side, I think that, how do I say this? It's here to stay. And I think your core idea that we've got to teach clinicians what good looks like before we outsource to the tools, I think that is like foundationally correct. And I wish more people talked about it that way. Because again, going back to that bad example that I use of my kid, like the school systems a long time ago decided that generally across the country that we teach them the basics of math before we let them go use the tools. Because you can't go the other way. You can't just teach them a calculator, then say, by the way, let's go do the handwritten math, And so same thing here. I think that I think we're going to see AI in almost every part of the the clinical setting. If whether it's documentation to billing to it's probably like even a controversial thing, but probably even to the extent that where it's probably helping guide what a doctor or a PT might want to say to somebody. I think we're going to see it everywhere, but the unspoken, I think, or less discussed importance is going to be teaching these people the what do you call it? The fundamentals. It's kind of like, I don't know if this was the same for, I'll just date myself. I'm 43. And I remember when we had to take the SATs. I don't even know if kids have to do it now anymore, but I remember when I took the SATs, you could have a regular calculator, but you couldn't have like the really cool TI 85 or whatever. And it was because like they didn't want you to put extra notes in there, but you could have like a basic, 10 button calculator. And there's a reason for that, because without that rule, you could theoretically allow people to cheat. And putting aside the fact that people shouldn't cheat, somebody could theoretically get through that aptitude test and test into something they're definitely not qualified to do. And then that has huge downstream impact on, are they taking the spot for another potential med student or lawyer or whatever. So I don't know. These are like very unfashionable things to talk about, because I think everybody's like, what is fashionable right now is to talk about AI and say, oh my gosh, are you into AI or are you not? And I think that medicine is one of those disciplines where the cost of failure is much higher than the benefit. But that's not fashionable to talk about. It's kind of like it's fashionable to say, how do I reduce documentation time by 15 minutes? By the way, this is, or go ahead.
No, I just think that like we obviously need to be like AI. Yeah, I don't think AI is going away. Like you said, like Google's not going away. AI is not going away. So like I think it's like something that we need to learn how to incorporate into our treatment and documentation. A lot of people target that because it's one of those things that people don't like to do, and it can help you with your writing. But once again, you still need to know, AI right now can't watch your treatments and see what you're doing and show your skill. Only you can determine that, and only you can put that in. So it really
you just have to know the foundations, because you need to know what's right and wrong. Like I do like using it, and it's great for some things, but you need to know like when it's appropriate and when it's not. I was saying, I asked like what's like to step up with like amputation or something. It gave me the wrong one. Like that was like basic PT 101. Like imagine if I was in a clinic and I didn't know that and I went to do it, the person might have fallen or like something could have happened. Like you do still need to know. You can use that, but like it's not always right. But certain things. I can't write. So to put down all my thoughts and be like, make this make sense to another person, it's helpful for that.
Yeah.
From a business standpoint, it's great. I think it's amazing to help write some of our, content and to
But
help
knowing
us,
your
right?
own ideas is best. I like to
Yes.
write things out messy and then tell it better. And I
Mhm.
think that's like the best way so
It
far.
cleans it up.
Right. Yeah. I think, just on a personal note, it's like I hated writing growing up. Like the summary of my grade school and maybe even college experience could be defined as like I took the path of least resistance when it came to writing. Like I was more inclined to take like engineering and math classes because there was less writing involved. It's just like weird. But by and large, even at 43, the vast majority of my life is spent communicating. And, despite this show, the vast majority of my day-to-day communication with people, both internally on our teams and externally with the industry, is email. So you're writing all day. And so there's really no way around it. So now I think we've established that AI is kind of here to stay and probably going to be more ubiquitous in not only this industry, but most industries going forward. On the other side, we've established that before you outsource to these tools, you really do need to make sure you have the fundamentals. But is there an in between there? And the answer might be no, but is there an in between there? Like for example, what do you say to the clinician that, I'll use a personal example. So about 4 doors down or four streets down from where I live is another young family that, she's a DPT. She just had her third child. And so as she's, and she went from 1 to 3 real fast, twins just now. And so, she works 4 10-hour days. And so that documentation sort of piles up after hours. What do you say right now to somebody like that in terms of how they can improve? So keep evenings stress-free. That's like the big language a lot of these ads are using, right? Like that promise of these AI tools, like keep your evenings stress-free, save time, save whatever. But we now have established like you kind of have to know the basics and there's risk and all that. But what do you say to somebody like that? Is it a matter of, and this is going to sound kind of ridiculous, but should we be teaching them to type faster? Should we be making better templates? Like what is there? Go ahead.
I think they just need to know what the right way to document, the right words to put in, and not putting all like. I know as an occupational therapist, I think more OT than PT. We're wordy. We like to write stories because we feel like we have to over justify our services, which really isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Because it's going to distract from the actual skill that you're providing, and it could lead you to more problems down the road.
Yeah.
So someone like
Yeah.
the DPT that you were talking about, we have a lot of people coming to us that are new moms returning to the field after a little break, either whether it be 6 months or 6 years. And, they don't know, maybe they were on paper, they were writing on paper and then they returned to work and they're like, oh, now I'm using this EMR system.
Right.
They don't, from a technology standpoint, they, are getting used to that. So that's overwhelming. But then just knowing what to type in your notes, like all the right things, the skilled phrases. And like we said, we provide treatment ideas with examples of how to document it. So just seeing that, it's like, oh, okay. Like light bulb, like, oh, this is how I do it. I don't have to write, 3 more sentences afterwards, like explaining each step of the activity.
But that's really easy, kind of having like more banks of documentation, like we say, like forever, so many different exercises. We have like all these ways the patient can present, which basically shows that you just click and then it's like done. So it does show your skill. It's pretty fast that way. And
examples of verbal cues, visual cues, physical, tactile, different strategies that we're commonly using in therapy. And it helps guide your treatments better too.
Okay, so this is going to sound like a broad question, but I'm genuinely curious, like how you guys think about this. Like, if you had a magic wand, let's just pretend there's like we're talking here. Let's just pretend there was like a practice owner here in the corner that we had the magic wand and we could like deep dive into the business real quick and look at it. When you guys like. You guys have done this enough to probably have some sort of intuitive sense of like where problem areas are, whether it's potential areas where they could get audited and they're screwing it up, or potential areas where their clinicians are just totally inefficient in terms of documentation and stuff. So in this like really broad, poorly articulated question, and you have this magic wand. Let's just say a practice owner opens the doors to their EMR and their office and everything to you. How, walk me through your thought process. Like, how do you guys look based on your intuition, your experience? Like, how do you guys spot like possible trouble areas or areas of opportunity from a documentation standpoint?
Well, first of all, we're looking, we actually have done a few chart reviews of ourselves with some of our members. And some of the red flags that we see are they're too vague. They're just saying the exercise, but they're not saying what skill you provided with them. They're also being repetitive. They're copy and pasting every single treatment. So it's like, they have 5 treatments in a row doing the same exercise. Well, what are your progressions? The same cues? Like how are you going to get reimbursed? Like, why is that patient, if they're not making improvements, why should they be reimbursed? So, we're going to look at that, why they would be denied. That's kind of like our main focus if we were to look at someone else's clinic.
And we went into some clinic owners too, and a lot specialize in different areas, maybe more athletes or more older adults or vestibular. If you take the basics of like their population, you can kind of make a more like advanced like guides, kind of documentation banks for it. Like you can go in, like we worked a lot with older adults. So I always like to use the transfer thing because PTs and OTs, but you can have like 20 different options, like how your patient presents and cues you give. And almost always is one of them, you have so many options, but we say really look at like your clinic focus and then really, show you documentation. How can we do this? What progressions can we give? How can we modify this? And have all those options available. Let people see it in your clinic. So it's easier to think or Google or go on AI, like they can see it.
So, and then this is super interesting. So what about the other way? So let's just say there's a practice owner listening to this or watching this right now. If they had to do like a self audit, because most people don't know what they don't know, right? So it's like, why should I go to Note Ninjas or where should I go? Why should I do X? So if there's a practice owner listening right now, is like, what should they be like? What should they be looking for in their own practice to determine like, oh, this could be a problem and I should probably either, I don't know, give my clinicians budget to do a membership with you guys, or even this, I don't even know if you guys have like a corporate sponsorship, but it's like, maybe they provide like part of their training through you guys or whatever. But like in terms of a self audit, so if a practice owner wanted to like self audit their documentation, I know it's probably really nuanced, longer than an episode like this, but generally speaking, like if they're looking at their own stuff, are there some telltale signs that if they notice in their clinicians' documents that could be red flags? Are there like, what are the most common mistakes? Maybe that's the better way to ask the question. Is that if a practice owner was to like look for common issues in documentation as a red flag to then seek better training, does anything come to mind there?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, not showing medical necessity, not showing justification for the services. So just giving treatment with no, clinical reasoning behind it.
Yeah.
And then, like I said before, being too vague. So not providing the specific cues that you're providing, the strategies that shows your skill versus a layperson or like just someone else who's underqualified to come and do it. So those things. Also, something that we haven't talked about is just their clinicians spending too much time on documentation, because I doubt that these clinic owners are paying their staff for documentation. If you are, power to you. We love you. But that's not common. Clinicians are not being paid for documentation. So we need to, look at their quality of life, because a lot of them are burning out because they have so many notes. They back up their notes. They can't do point of service. They're seeing 4 people an hour. And then that's kind of how their notes are not becoming compliant.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting because, like, again, from our perspective, because we're the system of record, we see all the data coming through the systems, and the question actually makes me wonder, like, longer term, I wonder if there's like some sort of systematic review that we can use, because from our perspective, it's like we can't fix that. We can't change. Obviously, we would not change the documentation, right? But when you see enough of these notes going through the system, thousands of them a day or a minute or whatever, or every hour or whatever, it's like, I wonder if computers could spot some of these things where it's like, hey, that's just, I love the example you use. Like, hey, that clinician is kind of like the last 5 documents from that clinician look like they're 90% the same. It's like, oh, somebody should probably look at that. Could it be a cut and paste error, or was there something worse there? So actually, that terrifies me. I should probably write that down. That's actually really interesting.
You're not customizing your notes, not keeping your notes patient centered. If you are writing like you said, 5 of the same notes, how, once again, what are you doing differently? And then it becomes like, it's just like a red flag as it raises some eyebrows of like, well, what is this person?
Yeah.
Like, why are we paying them?
It's interesting. Like, so, okay, so this is a half-baked thought, right? But so for my email client, I use this this product called Superhuman. Anyway, and I'm sure every other email client does this. But for example, if I write you an email and I say "see attached" and I try to send it, if I haven't attached something, it'll actually throw a little window that says, "We think you meant to attach something." You could bypass it, but it actually throws something up and says, "Hey, we think you might have meant to attach something. Is that true?" And it gives you the option to attach. And like maybe that's what this is going to look more like, where it's kind of like, tools, whether it's AI powered or not is irrelevant. Like tools that actually, before you hit save on that documentation, it says, you probably didn't document the need or the necessity here as well as you could have. Now you could still bypass it because computers can still be wrong.
I'm wondering if that fails an audit, then what happens? Then who's responsible?
Right.
That's a lot.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
When we were practicing clinicians, our EMR system did flag down for certain things that we had to make sure that we included, but it didn't. It didn't look at our comments
thing every day either.
Right. It was like more like, you include your billing, make sure you have your signature, like that type of stuff. But it didn't have, your underlying, your results, your the skill that you're showing. Yes, the clinical reasoning.
Yeah. I think like it. It's interesting. Maybe this is more philosophical, but I think we as and this is true of every industry, not just medicine. I think everybody's like so hot and heavy on AI that like if you put 10 people in a row and said, what does it actually look like to have AI? Nobody could probably describe it to you. But I sort of think of it as more like, I think what's going to actually happen is we're going to see just what appear to be little minor improvements throughout the usage or the documentation workflow that individually seem like very small things, but all add up to something greater. And a good example of that would be like, if I text you on the latest versions of Apple iOS or whatever, as you're typing a word out, if it thinks it knows the word, it gives you the option. So you can just quickly hit space and it auto completes it, which again, that's an example of like something that's so small that you're probably like, that doesn't add any value at all. But that in conjunction with other things provides a demonstrable increase in overall typing speed. I think that's kind of probably what it's going to look like for medicine going forward, is that it's going to be lots of little widgets, if you will, that like streamline the clinician's day to day, and it's going to look more like that and less like, oh my gosh, how do I take 2 hours of documentation down to like one? Well, it's not going to be like some magic thing, one thing that you do to do that. It's going to be something that takes off 5 minutes through the day here, 10 minutes through the day there, and all of it adds up to like maybe an hour or less. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, this is going to, again, I'm going to date myself, but like as a society, I think a lot of people forget that like we're the last generation of people that lived pre-smartphone, or maybe I am, I don't know. But the thing is like, it's wild to me how fast we've gotten to where we are. Like here we are 17 years actually from when the first iPhone was delivered or whatever. It's like prior to that, my BlackBerry was just fine. And now like, it sounds crazy, but I could probably run 70% of my businesses off of this, which is crazy. So when I think about AI, like it's not going anywhere, but I don't think it's going to take like 20 years to see the real benefit of it. I think it's going to be the next, like the biggest increases are going to happen in the next probably 2 to 4 years. And I love what you said earlier about, it's about training the foundations to the clinicians before they outsource it. And I think, so how do you guys, maybe if you guys don't want to talk about this, you don't have to, but when you think about like your training and the services you guys offer, like I'm guessing the plan is to have like CEUs and stuff like that kind of, let me hear it from you then, because I'm probably doing a bad job of describing it. But when you think about like what you guys are rolling out, I got the impression based on what you just said, there's probably like some consultative stuff here. But then on the other side, I'm guessing the natural progression is like CEUs and stuff like that. But what does that look like for you guys going forward?
Yeah. Well, so I'll just say we started out with like our main target as just the staff clinician. So the PT and OT who struggle with their notes, who struggle with working hours and hours and stressed out and everything like that. And those were like our main audience. But now it's like we want to progress to going above them to their clinic owners, because they should be the ones taking care of their staff clinicians, because we see all the time people are struggling to hire, they're struggling to retain employees. And we think a big part of that is not having the right resources and mentorship available to them, or maybe they think that they do, but they don't. So, I mean, clearly all these therapists are coming to us. There's a reason why they're coming to us and not their employer.
Right.
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 We have different things too. So we have our membership, which is more like the basics, like we said, like the treatment ideas with the documentation. We have all these ways to document different activities. We actually do have a CEU course too, which is more the foundations. We teach like the rules and then a million examples. It's a 10-hour course, so we do a couple of times. But yeah, so it teaches you the basics and then exactly how to use it into like your treatment. So that's more of like a holistic way of like learning it and being able to use it right away.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably oversimplifying it, but it's kind of one of those things where like if you can get better at documentation, like and I haven't seen any of the courses, right? But in general, like it's like from a clinician standpoint, if you can get better at the documentation, you theoretically reduce your own time spent on it while also increasing your own value to the clinic you work at. On the other side of that coin, for the practice owner that might invest in something like that, you're decreasing theoretically your sort of audit exposure or your risk exposure, while also investing in your employees, and so it is sort of a win-win. So not to make it sound too easy, but it's like it's almost like a marketing problem. Like this, coming back full circle, I think documentation is sort of the most important part of the entire workflow, and yet it's sort of painted as the big bad boogeyman. But instead, it's where the most opportunity lies.
Nobody likes it. No, plus if you're looking to hire someone, if you're telling them you're going to get them out of work on time and you have this documentation system in place, people are going to want to go there. We actually had put up our friend's job posting that she uses like our documentation and like has everything right. She doesn't have them work nights. Like people are like, can you have that in other areas? There was a specific area, like wherever it was, but like that's what we need. Like we want that work-life balance. Like,
yeah.
And sometimes I don't know if like employees think about maybe like the pay right away, but it's also a lot, especially if people are working. New grads might go right to like the money at first, and they'll start working and be like, oh my gosh, I have no time for my friends. I have no time to do this. Have a family, then forget it. But if you've been working, like, like it's almost more important just having that time to out of the clinic. You want both. You want to help your patients, but then you want the time with your family. And sometimes that's even more important when you're looking for like a job.
Yeah. Okay, so this is going to sound crazy. If I had to bet, full disclosure. So I do a lot of angel investing in other businesses, and when I think about like even companies like Duolingo, for example, they're not in the medical space. They do like they basically teach other languages, right? And the reason they've been so successful, in my opinion, over the last 10, 12 years is that they've gamified it, where like my 10-year-old loves Duolingo because like, and the rational brain is like, oh yeah, come on, that doesn't really work. But like they're a multi-billion-dollar company now. And they will tell you even publicly, like what they did was like, it's not that their language training is any different than anybody else. Like that is not the competitive differentiator. In fact, what they did was they gamified it because humans, whether they're my 10-year-old, or they're like a 35-year-old on a train somewhere commuting to work, ultimately, as much as we all hate to admit it, humans we like to win and we like little games. It's kind of like airline status points. Like rationally, those things make no sense. You can never really even use those points. And yet airlines are flying over all of us right now with a bunch of people that think they're getting more points for doing it. So the point is like if I had to make a crazy bet, putting aside AI for a minute, I think whoever can kind of like gamify documentation they're going to win. And the end result of that, I think, is probably something that's a little speedier and less, stressful evenings and all that, but also better outcome or better. It's better for the patient, better for the practice owner, better for the clinician. I don't know who's going to build that. But I think, yeah. There you go. So by the way, in the show notes, we're going to put a link to your all's website and your social media profiles. But for anybody watching this or, what's the best way for them to reach out to you guys?
Yeah, so you can follow us on Instagram at the Note Ninjas, and we also have a pediatric page at the Note Ninjas _peds. And pretty much you can find us by just researching the Note Ninjas. Just type the Note Ninjas into Google, you will find us. Our email is thenoteninjas@gmail.com. We are very active on our email, in our DMs on Instagram.
Love it.
And that's the best way.
I love it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.